What's up guys, Evan Jarvis here. In today's video, you are gonna learn why starting with no money, no bankroll can be a good thing in poker, how to stop self-sabotaging yourself and your results, and learn the data behind why calling down with top pair is probably costing you money. Let's get stacking.
Today, what we're going to be discussing is the 5 ways you destroy your tournament results. Brief introduction. For those of you who don't know who I am, here is a brief introduction. I turned pro in 2006 when I was 18 years old. I haven't had a real job since. I have WPT and EPT final tables along with WCoop and Scoop event wins. More importantly, I have taught more private poker lessons than anyone on earth. Of course, I'm just guessing on that bullet point, but I'm fairly sure it's correct. I've been coaching privately since 2007. I think it's a good idea for any professional to have other streams of income just due to the unpredictable nature of poker. I found out early on that I actually really enjoyed coaching, so I stuck with that. If you want to learn something, teach it. Those were the words of the brilliant Mr. Feynman. I found the more I taught, the better I got at Hold'em, so I really do just love it. Of my thousands of students, I had the privilege of working with 3 #1 Pocket Fivers, a Player of the Year, and several others. Surprisingly, however, you know who teaches you the most? It's the German housewives, the oil field workers, and the music professors. Because getting people from other industries to question your work is amazing because they'll ask anything. There are no wrong questions. They have no preconceived notion curtailing their creativity. Anyway, while I love that, there were some things I noticed routinely while I was teaching. Rampant self-sabotage being most of it. Most of my job is teaching people how to coach themselves, as even #1 Pocket Fivers sometimes don't know how to use Flopzilla, Card Runners EV, and whatnot. I also give people plays they wouldn't know without a great deal of combinatoric and analytic work. However, the other odd part of my job is being someone a guy can talk to after he harms himself in a tournament. So let's talk frankly here for a second. Another big part of my job is just being a friend to poker players, but a good friend. Sadly, it's hard to find really good friends in poker. It's not that other poker players are bad, but many times the good, helpful friends are busy working on their own game, and the bad influences are available all the time. I've always tried to be open with my students, answering all their emails and even giving them my cell, because poker is a fairly lonely profession or hobby. You're never quite sure when you're doing the wrong thing. I've always been more of a journeyman pro. I'm a good-sized winner in cash games, tournaments, and sit-and-goes, but I'm not Doug Polk either. Because I've been around a while, I can usually tell you if you're way off on something, and that tends to be my job. But the one thing that blows my mind the thing that consistently blew my mind when I started doing this job and still blows my mind is how much even great players give away their tournaments. Why do I not give away tournaments? As in, why do I not detonate? Why do I not self-immolate when I play poker? Well, the reason for that is I've definitely given away tournaments in my lifetime, but far less than the average person. The only reason for that is because I was really broke before poker and I didn't want to go back. I really believe this is the only talent I've ever had. The more I've analyzed No Limit Hold'em tournaments, the more I've been surprised by how just not sabotaging yourself will take you far in the game. I had no talent to speak of when I turned pro. People think that's a joke, but it's true. There was an early Card Runners video by, I think his name, Aaron Bean, I think it was. Anyway, there was a training video on Card Runners that came out when I was 19 where this professional player was discussing how horrendous I was. I was seen as one of the worst pros by a number of people in that time, period. The only thing that kept me going was I didn't have the tendency to self-destruct nearly as much. And I'm not going to be gentle here. I don't think most early pros had any fight in them. They were rich white kids from wealthy American families who had nothing to lose if things went south, and they just had no fight in them. I think that's why so many of them are gone now. They never wanted this. They wanted to look like a pro. They didn't want to work like one. I was broke before poker. I literally graduated high school living in a friend's garage. I paid my rent at that time doing landscaping work. Because of that, I accidentally didn't self-sabotage nearly as much as 99% of pros. And while my fundamentals at the time were horrendous, just because I never gave away a tournament, I ended up developing a career in professional poker. I think anyone listening to this broadcast right now could do the same thing I did. It's not that hard. Why do most people sabotage themselves? My personal opinion is that human beings are not mentally equipped to play poker. People forget that human beings are mammals and that we did not evolve to play a card game. Regardless of culture, all teenage boys behave a certain way around women. That's human primality. Similarly, most humans cannot consent to a financial loss. My personal opinion for why humans self-destruct in poker tournaments is that the human mind is not created for poker. They do this research to find out what humans do in certain situations. You can use this to detect our primal nature. If you put teenage boys in a social setting with teenage girls, you will see increased risk-taking, for example. That is all over the world, regardless of language, culture, anything. It's the same thing with humans and investments. We have primal desires. In the book Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman and company were some of the first to quantify this. In an experiment that's been replicated hundreds of times, people were given the opportunity to consent to a medium-sized loss or to gamble to possibly save themselves. 80% of people always gamble. Human beings are terrible at accepting loss. They replicate that study everywhere. How to stop self-sabotaging. Self-sabotage is easier to avoid once someone tells you how truly awful some plays are. It also helps if you take a few hours to look at your opponent's likely ranges and some of their tendencies on a database. Once you see how historically bad some of your plays are and how they don't stand up to scrutiny, it becomes much harder to screw yourself in the game. Let's take a look at item 1 out of 5. Now, when I teach guys, I do it in a question and answer format. I do that because research shows if you make people answer questions during a lesson, they'll retain 4 times as much information. For you to get that effect, however, I need you to pay attention, think of your answers, and write them down. Now, everybody, you hearing me okay? Everybody good? You ready for this? Oop. Hold on, I'm pulling out the questions section. Good, everybody hearing me? Everybody good? All right, good to hear. Just so you guys know what I'm looking at. All right, let's get into this. Just want to make sure we're good, not getting offline or anything. All right, let's get into it. So, in this hand, a player under the gun +2 opens to 3x. Our hero calls in the big blind. He doesn't kill. Our hero calls in the big blind with ace-10 of hearts. The board comes 4 of hearts, 10 of clubs, queen of spades. Our hero check calls a flop c-bet. Our hero checks on the turn of 6 of spades, and the villain bets half pot. What is your move? Okay. 30 seconds, everybody. And again, if there's ever any audio issues or video issues, just let me know in the questions and I will hop to it. Walter B says he would call. Oleksiy Bazanov says he would call. Ted says call. Got a few folds. Lyle saying fold. Brad says fold. Michael says fold. I see that timer. All right, you guys have had enough time. All right. Now. Okay, now let's see if what you chose is a good idea. But let's admit it, guys, most people don't know what to do here. They call or fold and hope for the best in the hero spot. Let's remember these great words. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Let's throw some logic in here. My use of analytics. I grew increasingly annoyed at how everyone in poker would see a situation like this and go, you know, I picked my spots. That's a non-answer. I would get fired if I told my students that. So I got into looking at databases of online and live players. Seems pretty basic, right? Like we should know what the field does. Like they do that in sports. Why don't we do that in poker? Analytics sounds like a scary word, guys, but all it means is you look at the average numbers people do something. If you saw the movie Moneyball, they did a lot of that. They saw that certain players got to first base a large percentage of the time and how that helped. What we're going to do is not much different. By the way, I apologize to everybody from Europe who has no idea what I just said. So here's an example of a database. This isn't what I use when I'm constructing my plays, but it's a good example of something you guys can use at home. Hold'em Manager 2 is affordable and the opponent's averages are very helpful. Now, I didn't give you any information about the player in question, which is fine. In many tournament hands, we don't know anything about the guy. So what we have to do is work with the averages. I have circled the important ones here. The first is PFR, that stands for pre-flop raise. You'll notice in that column, there's not a ton of variability. That's good, because if half the players open 10% of the hands, but the other half open 30%, then the average of 20% wouldn't help that much. It'd be too loose for half the players and too tight for the other half. That said, in most databases, that tends to be the opening range. I purposefully picked an American database because they tend to have the highest opening ranges in most barreling. If we have a questionable call versus these people, we're in real trouble pretty much always. Now, with this information on what the masses generally do, we can make a guess as to what is generally happening here. So let's construct a tough 15% range here. The general pre-flop raise. It's probably 20% from later position, but let's see here. For those of you who don't know what software I'm using here, this is called Flopzilla. It's $30 and worth every cent. I imagine Jonathan Little's brain looks like Flopzilla during a hand, but for us mere mortals, we need to put our hand in dead cards over here, our opponent's range in starting hands, and start filling out the rest of this. Okay. Once we get to this flop, we put the flop here in, wait for it, the flop section. We then need to decide what he's c-betting with. Most people c-bet too much versus a big blind flatter who checked, so let's just put a blue filter next to every type of hand listed underneath statistics, then hit this red button. Well, it's normally red. Once you click it, it turns green. Then this will take his c-betting range over to the turn. So now, this is where the magic happens. Again, he bets the turn. Remember, we saw in a database that most people only do this with about 40% of the hands. I'm also giving him more bluffs on this turn because I increased his flop c-bet from 62% to 100%. If I only had him c-betting 62% of hands, there wouldn't be that many bluffs available on the turn because I would have already cut out a bunch of them on the flop. But instead, I'm bringing them here. Well, take a look at what 40% of the hands is. I put a blue filter next to everything that would make up 40% of the hands here. That's top pair or better, flush draws, and open-ended straight draws. Now guys, we all play a lot of cards. That tends to be what people like to bet on that turn, right? They like to bet their draws, they like to bet like big pairs, and a lot of times they'll check back for pot control with the smaller pairs. Now, I got a question for you. How much equity do you have against that range? 80, 60, 40, or 20? I'll give you a couple more seconds on this. we have one person who said I have no clue in the chat. A couple people saying 60, a couple people saying 20. People say, somebody asked, how do you do this live? Honestly, you don't. You memorize what the numbers are in a bunch of similar situations, and then you just make sure when you get home it fit into that. So I'm going to show you how to generally do this, okay? Everybody's saying they're just guessing. That's an issue, okay? The answer is 20%. It's closest to 20%. Now, if you did not know the answer to that, I want to ask you a question. Actually, I want you to do something. I want you to ask yourself, how many times have you called there on that turn in that situation? It didn't know how much equity you had versus somebody who likely was even betting all their draws. Did you think you were doing much better if they were betting all their draws? How many times have you been in that situation and had no idea how much equity you had? Doesn't that seem like a pretty egregious error? This is a fold 9 times out of 10. Your opponent isn't betting king 10 for value, so you're not beating any of his value hands. And we had him semi-bluffing and you still weren't doing that well. Even if he's betting all of his flush draws and open-ended straight draws, you're still going to have 27% equity. So you'll notice that I put this button from from red to green, which took his likely betting range according to the analytics on the turn. I entered our hand here, and what you'll notice is our hand's equity is about 27%. Imagine how bad this is if there are no flush draws. If he's one of those guys who checks back his flush draws. In this scenario, I literally gave him every bluff I could. I added only open-ended straight draws and flush draws, but didn't add like queen 10, for example. It seems highly unlikely that would ever happen, but you'll notice you only have 38% equity here if he's bluffing everything and has none of the normal value hands. That means if you put in half the chips that comprise this pot, you'd only be getting less than 40% of them back. But there's another problem here. What is it? The hand doesn't end on the turn. He has a shot to hit all those draws. And that's when people really lose their asses off. Even if the river misses, like on this perfect card, they check on this river, the guy bets, and they call because, oh, the flush draw and straight draw missed. But the average guy only bets 28% of the time on the river. Look at that, okay? And that number only goes south when you look at most databases. When you track for live hands too, that number only goes further down. People are really bad at bluffing and really bad at value betting. Do you know what that range looks like if he's betting like that? Well, to visualize this, we have our handy range visualizer here. We have to pick out 40% of the hands on the turn because remember, the average turn bet was 40%. So I generously give him 45%, as you can see looking at the downward arrow. I put a blue filter next to everything I think is barreling. You see those marked by the other arrows here. Remember guys, I'm being generous at every turn. I am giving him more bluffs than what the analytics say he has by a long shot. If I had him checking back any high cards with a backdoor flush draw on the flop, then he wouldn't have these hands on the turn. If I had him betting only 40% of the hands on the turn, we would have to take out some bluffs. But generously, I give him all these hands, and then I click the red button that the downward arrow is pointing at and turn it into green. And you'll see on the left that we now have his turn betting range. So let's bring a river out here and see what it means when the average guy bets less than 3 times out of 10 on the river. Guys, I want to show you something. This is now a dream scenario on the river. I have him betting all of his missed draws on the river. There were both straight draws and flush draws that missed here. He's betting all of them. Your equity is still 30% on the river. That's the best case scenario. If he's betting big, you can't call. Even if he tells you he's betting all of those hands. Because he still has the hand 7 times out of 10. What do you think happens when he's only betting flush draws? Like he just gives up with his straight draws. What do you think happens when there's no missed draws and you still call down? What do you think happens if he's only betting 28% of the hands here like the average player does? Complete disaster. Yes, that's 0% equity versus the typical 30% betting range on the river. I can tell you for a fact that most players are terrified to triple barrel bluff, but have no problem betting their overpairs and sets. So this tends to be pretty true. You want to see something really crazy though? The number I have circled is the fold to river c-bet. That is 20%. That means versus a triple barrel, the average person is calling 8 times out of 10. You'll notice raise river c-bet right next to it is 3%. That means the average guy is calling there nearly 8 times out of 10, when on average he has 0% equity on the river. And that is why the number one way people destroy their tournament results is through calling down with weak top pairs and great second pairs for no reason. That is a recipe for disaster if you're playing $250 tournaments in Vegas, $500 tournaments pretty much anywhere, Heartland Poker Tour events, MSPT events, Venetian events, WSOP dailies, online tournaments, most of them, 20, 50s. You need a lot of evidence to call down there, because if he's just betting all of his draws, remember, it's not enough to call. Now, the next 4 on this list aren't as involved as that first one. I won't take up too much of your time today. That first one is just one that baffles me, and I always wanted to make a presentation on why it's so bad. So I thank you guys for giving me an opportunity to do that. If you just remove number 1, this first thing, if you remove that from your game, you will go much further in tournament poker. By the way, next time you guys go play live, pay attention to how many guys are hemming and hawing on the river before they call, and count how many times they're right. Sometimes you'll even see them hold their cards above the muck or nod their head like they knew they were beat, but they can't fold on the river. Also, guys, I have to ask a very interesting question that once you start pondering is hard to forget. Should you invest in anything you don't know about? Do you think Warren Buffett doesn't know about the things he invests in? Do you think any successful investor just throws money in hoping for the best? No, that's not good investing, and all poker tournaments are investing games. That's it. If you don't know what to do, fold. And the math and analytics really back that up. This has been a preview for Master Tournament Poker in one class. If you enjoyed the subject matter of this presentation, if you enjoyed the way I come to my analysis in this presentation, if this sounds like the type of training you think would get your game to the next level, Master Tournament Poker in one class is the product for you. In this one, it is a complete out-the-box program to get you mastering tournaments. We discuss pre-flop raising, 3-betting, 4-betting, cold calling, blind defense, how to play each stage of a tournament, flops, turns, rivers, ICM. There's tons of reference materials. There's several videos that will guide you through it. Not a minute is wasted.
And that wraps up this part of the training series. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned a lot from it. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know how I'm doing. And if you learned something from this video, please let me know in the comments what your key takeaway or your biggest aha moment from watching this video was. I promise you, if you do that and then look at the other comments that are there, you're going to learn a whole lot more. This is the beauty of YouTube. This is the beauty of community. This is how we grow as a team, by sharing our insights, reading what others' insights were, and engaging in discussion to further develop those thought processes. I really hope you're enjoying this learning series. And when you're ready to watch more training lessons like this one, feel free to check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Gripst, or come by my website, www.gripst.com, and join Team Gripst for exclusive discounts, offers, and training opportunities. We got a whole lot of good ones coming on the way, and I hope that you are someone I will be getting to share them with. Let's get stacking. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it educational and entertaining. If you want to join Team Gripst, click on that subscribe button and tap that bell to be notified every time a new video goes live. For behind the scenes updates and motivational quotes from my poker journey, follow me on Instagram. And when you're ready to take one step closer to becoming poker's next champion, click on me in 3, 2, 1, and let's get stacking.